Detective Raven. I'm Judge Maddox, and this is the Mercy Capital Court.
Hold on, just wait.
You're before this court today charged with the murder of your wife.
Oh my God. I loved my wife. I didn't hurt her.
If you are innocent, prove it.
See. Get me out of here! Do you honestly think that I killed my wife?
I think there's more that you're not revealing.
Race Against the Clock in Mercy, 2026, where every second counts, algorithms decide your fate, and intelligence is your only weapon. 3 words to sum it up: clock, mind, survival. I'll break it down, drop some flick facts, and tell you if it's worth your time.
Homelessness drove Los Angeles into a crime epidemic. Prisons were overcrowded. Citywide red zones were established to restrict individuals implicated in violent activities.
Thousands of police officers have already lost their lives in the line of duty. In response, the Department of Justice introduces Mercy Court, a radical system where capital offenders are judged by artificial intelligence.
Now, extreme circumstances call for extreme measures. We need the Mercy Court, and I'll be encouraging my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support it.
Now Chris Raven, an LAPD detective from the Robbery Homicide Division, suddenly wakes up inside Mercy Court. Judge Maddox informs him. Maddox reveals that he is on trial for the murder of his wife, Nicole Raven.
You're before this court today charged with the murder of your wife, Nicole Raven.
She accesses the police evidence file and plays the footage.
No one else here, it's just me.
Yeah, we're coming
There's no one here, it's just my mom. Yeah,
Who did this to you?
Chris.
Chris insists the accusation is impossible. Maddox calmly tells him to check the evidence himself. Chris looks up Nicole Raven and finds a news report about his own arrest. Maddox then informs him that based on available evidence, his probability of guilt is calculated at 97.5%. That is far above the 80% threshold required to trigger a mercy trial. She opens the municipal cloud.
This is the Los Angeles Municipal Cloud. You may use any and all resources available to this court to provide me with evidence of your innocence. Should you be found guilty, you will be executed in precisely 90 minutes.
No.
Your trial will now commence.
No.
The trial begins. Chris panics. Maddox then summarizes Chris's activities earlier that morning. He arrived at work at 8:51 a.m. Instead of entering the building, he turned around and returned home. Doorbell camera footage shows Chris asking Nicole to open the door. She tells him she is done with him and that he can speak through a lawyer. Chris lets himself in with his key, and Nicole begins yelling at him. Shortly after he left, Britt returned home from a sleepover and discovered Nicole's body. The crime scene data shows Nicole was stabbed during the time Chris was inside the house. The wound, Chris insists he did not do it. Maddox responds that he is right-handed and that traces of Nicole's blood were found on his shirt. She continues, explaining that after leaving the house, Chris went straight to a bar and drank heavily. Chris argues that he never went to a bar. Maddox then shows him bar cam footage of officers attempting to arrest him. Chris resists but is eventually handcuffed. Chris remains silent. She then asks why he returned home that morning. Chris admits he cannot remember anything. Chris asks if he can speak to Britt. Maddox informs him that Britt is staying with Nicole's parents. Chris nods and Maddox sends the request on his behalf. The protocol also allows him to contact his sponsor. Rob Nelson answers the call. Rob says everyone at the company is shocked by Nicole's death. Chris admits he cannot remember what happened. Rob sighs and says Chris should have called if he felt tempted to drink. Chris insists he did not kill Nicole. Before he can say more, Maddox abruptly ends the call, stating that the purpose of the call was to address his relapse. Chris argues that Rob knows how happy he and Nicole were. Maddox responds with a faint smile and says she already understands the state of their marriage. She plays a video showing Chris and Nicole's past. For several years, Chris's life appears stable. Then Maddox highlights a traumatic incident where his partner Ray is killed on duty. After that, Chris begins drinking again. She then plays another video. In it, Britt confides to her boyfriend that her father has become scary and that her mother has been crying in bed. The video ends. Chris tells Maddox they monitored Britt's Instagram and never saw this clip. Maddox explains that Britt maintained 2 accounts. At that moment, Britt accepts Chris's request for a call. She cries and tells him her mother is dead. Chris gently tries to calm her. Britt asks why he was sent to Mercy Court if he was at work during the murder. Chris says it is all a misunderstanding. Britt mentions that her grandfather Jeff told her no one gets a mercy trial unless they are guilty. Chris urges her not to listen. Just then Jeff appears and ends the call. Chris tells Maddox Jeff is trying to turn Britt against him. Chris explodes in anger, shouting that the clock is meaningless and accusing Maddox of deciding people's fate before they sit in the chair. Maddox responds that she is not designed to feel emotions. She only evaluates facts. Then she says plainly that if he is innocent, he must prove it. Otherwise, Britt will lose both her parents today. Chris inhales deeply and asks to speak with his partner Jack. Maddox informs him that he may contact anyone during the trial as long as they can help gather evidence or provide character testimony. Chris chooses the second option. The system connects the call, and Jack appears on screen. She looks at him and says he is in a serious mess. Chris insists he did not kill his wife and asks Jack to walk him through the crime scene. While looking at a drone camera view of his house, he asks Maddox for the crime scene files. Jack warns him that if the situation does not favor him, she will not lie. Chris nods and asks Maddox to project the scene scans. She generates an immersive reconstruction of the crime scene using the available footage and forensic data. She notices a broken vase on the floor and suggests that Nicole may have tried to defend herself by swinging it at her attacker. Chris asks Maddox about the footprints on the floor. Maddox replies that they belong to Britt. Chris asks about fingerprints on the knife. Maddox confirms they match his. Chris explains that Nicole was always afraid of knives, so he usually handled cutting food in the kitchen. He then asks about fiber evidence. Maddox explains that the fibers also point to him. Every piece of evidence points to Chris. Chris asks Maddox to retrieve Nicole's phone records. Maddox brings up a virtual interactive version of Nicole's phone on the screen. Chris asks about her call history. Chris suddenly remembers something. A week earlier, he saw Nicole texting someone during an argument. He asks Maddox to search through Britt's videos because Britt often recorded their arguments. Maddox scans the footage but reports that she cannot find the number Nicole texted. Chris then asks if Nicole had a work phone. Maddox says there is no official record of a second phone connected to Nicole. At that moment, an officer informs Jack that they have discovered a second phone inside Nicole's car. Maddox asks Jack to activate Bluetooth on her phone and hold the discovered device close to it, and informs Chris that the phone is not a work phone. It is a burner phone not registered in the municipal cloud. Maddox notes that the phone's call history contains only one number. She attempts to call the number. The person on the other end immediately hangs up after hearing that the call is coming from Mercy Capital Court. Maddox informs Chris that the signal is currently coming from the vicinity of the Hollywood Red Zone. Jack immediately heads there in her vehicle. Chris watches as the system updates the probability meter. His guilt rate drops slightly. Maddox performs another scan and identifies the exact location of the caller. The suspect appears to be inside the Hudson Hotel and is attempting to escape through a back door. Maddox identifies him as Patrick, a chef working at the Hudson Hotel. Chris argues that innocent people do not run. Maddox calmly replies that frightened people run as well. Jack eventually catches Patrick after a short chase. Patrick insists that he has done nothing wrong. He explains that he panicked after receiving a call from Mercy Court. After the call, he checked the news and saw that Nicole was dead. Afraid that he might be blamed, he ran before things could escalate further. Patrick snaps back, saying he gave Nicole everything Chris could not. Maddox interrupts the argument and asks Patrick how he knows Nicole. Chris asks about the burner phones. Patrick says Nicole wanted to keep their conversations private. For that reason, he bought her a burner phone. Maddox confirms that Patrick owned both his personal phone and the burner. Maddox accesses the hotel's security cameras and rewinds to the estimated time of Nicole's death. Footage from the kitchen clearly shows Patrick working there during the entire period. Chris quietly admits that Patrick cannot be the killer. Jack then places Patrick under arrest for resisting during the chase. Maddox informs Chris that his guilt probability has now increased again. She explains that instead of presenting a suspect to the court, Chris has only established a stronger motive for why he might have committed the crime. Maddox asks whether Chris truly believed he would find evidence to clear his name or if he simply wanted to confront the man who slept with his wife. Chris asks Maddox if she really believes he killed Nicole after discovering the affair. Maddox responds sharply that he clearly is not telling the entire truth. She notes how quickly he assumed an affair existed, suggesting he may have already suspected it. Chris admits he is not surprised about Patrick. He confesses that he has been letting Nicole down for months. Maddox asks when he resumed drinking. Chris answers, recalling that Nicole confronted him about it. He sighs and admits he has struggled with alcoholism throughout his life. He says he stayed sober after marrying Nicole, and everyone was proud of him, until Ray's death on duty. Chris reveals that when he arrived at work this morning, he reached for the bottle he kept in his car, but it was gone. He assumed Nicole had found it. Furious, he went home and confronted her. They argued because she had thrown away his bottle. In retaliation, he smashed her favorite vase. A shard of glass flew up and cut her. He offered to clean up the blood, which explains why Nicole's blood was found on his shirt. Maddox asks why he did not mention this earlier. Chris replies, because it made me look bad. He admits he cannot remember what happened afterward. Maddox interrupts him, saying that if he confesses to murder, the court will lock the verdict and he will have to wait for his execution. Chris then asks Maddox to show everyone with whom Nicole had regular contact. Maddox displays a list on the screen. He admits that Patrick was right. If he had been closer to Nicole, he would have known what was happening in her life. He then asks to speak with Patrick. Maddox informs him that Patrick is being processed at a local police station and arranges the call. Patrick appears on screen. Chris asks whether Nicole had faced any problems. Patrick shakes his head and says it was the usual complaints about Chris not spending enough time with her or Britt. Chris asks if Nicole had trouble at work. Patrick's memory is triggered. He recalls that Nicole was investigating missing chemicals from Viking shipping. A customer reported missing materials in a shipment, and her boss asked Nicole to look into it. Chris turns his attention to Nicole's colleagues. Maddox confirms that all of them are at work, and none have been within a mile of his neighborhood since Sunday. He instructs Jack to investigate the Viking shipping depot. Chris asks Maddox whether Britt recorded anything during the barbecue. They review the footage together. Maddox checks street cameras. Chris considers the streets behind his house, noting that someone could have jumped the back fence. He remembers his neighbor Bill, who has a bird camera. The barbecue started at 2 p.m. on Sunday. She tracks Rob's vehicle, which enters Chris's street at 2:30 p.m., but Chris notices he is not alone. 3 passengers accompany him. He tells Maddox he needs to speak with Rob. On the call, Chris asks Rob about the people he gave a ride to. Rob names Carla, Marie, and Leo. Chris then asks if anyone missed work on Monday. Rob replies no. Chris notices and says, "I think my dad's home. I'm out." He asks Maddox to access department logs to confirm the time. Records show he was still at the precinct when the video was recorded. Finally, he asks Maddox to connect him to Britt. Britt appears on screen in tears. She accuses Chris of lying and shows him a video posted on YouTube. Chris is drunk at a bar, though he was supposed to be at work. She asks if he killed Nicole. Chris insists he did not. As Britt moves to end the call, Maddox steps in, explaining that her father is defending himself and Britt's help could influence the case. Chris gently steers the conversation. He asks about a video Britt posted on Instagram the previous night. Britt explains she heard a door closing. She checked the house but found nothing. Shortly after, a friend picked her up for a sleepover. Chris asks Maddox to replay the video. He notices the basement door is slightly open. He asks Britt if she opened it. She shakes her head. Maddox enhances the image, confirming Chris's suspicion. A realization dawns. The killer may have never left the house after the Sunday barbecue. Instead, he could have remained hidden and killed Nicole on Tuesday. Chris promises to explain everything to Britt later and ends a call. He checks the probability meter. She points out that he has overlooked a crucial part of the puzzle: the person stealing chemicals from Viking shipping. Chris nods and begins searching Nicole's emails for missing stock references. He repeatedly finds mentions of UG. "What's UG?" he asks. Maddox explains it is urea grande, a chemical frequently appearing in Viking shipping records. One particular name catches Chris's attention. He asks Maddox how much UG has gone missing. Maddox calculates that over 300 kilos of urea grande are missing. Chris and Maddox access Holt's inbox. They find an urgent meeting request from Nicole on Friday. Maddox immediately pulls up security footage from Viking Shipping. The video shows Hull and Nicole arguing. Chris reviews emails and discovers Hull has a gambling problem. Chris realizes Hull could be stealing the chemicals to make drugs and pay off debts. When Nicole uncovered the scheme, Hull silenced her, but Chris's guilt rate drops. He contacts Rob, but Hull answers instead. Hull sounds concerned and asks if Chris is all right. Maddox intervenes and insists Hull put Rob on the line. Chris asks Maddox where Jack is. She informs him that she is 4 minutes away from Viking Shipping. In the meantime, they pull up the birdcam footage from his neighbor's house. Holt returns to the call and claims he cannot find Rob. Chris directly accuses him of killing Nicole after she discovered he was stealing chemicals. Holt hesitates, then insists that Rob is the one who was stealing the chemicals. He admits that both he and Nicole discovered the theft, but chose not to report Rob because he had always been good to them. Rob had even helped Holt financially when he was in trouble. Chris demands to know where Rob is. Holt says he just learned that Rob left work early because he felt sick. The manager allowed him to leave. The last time Holt saw Rob was at the barbecue. Rob stayed behind after everyone else left to speak with Nicole privately and reassure her that everything would be fine. Maddox tracks Rob's vehicle and discovers it is at his home. Chris instructs Jack to go to Rob's house while Maddox notifies the local SWAT team. Maddox shows Chris the archived traffic camera footage. It shows Bill Peterson's car pulling into the lot. After Bill exits the vehicle, Rob emerges from the trunk. Chris's guilt percentage drops again. Maddox points out that the GPS tracker still shows the vehicle is at the house. Chris realizes that Rob must have removed the tracker and left it there to mislead them. Chris tells Maddox to search the traffic cameras for the truck. Maddox reports that there is no detectable Viking license plate. Chris concludes that Rob likely removed that as well. An officer informs Chris that there is nothing useful inside Rob's house. Chris asks him to hold that photo closer. He instructs the officers to search the garage. Inside the garage, they discover burned papers that were deliberately destroyed. Chris then looks at Jack and instructs her to go back. He points out that when they last called Rob, he was not at Viking Shipping. The officers then discover containers of Urea Grande, along with a truck license plate and physical maps. They then find a book that Maddox identifies. Inside is a detailed manual for constructing explosives. Chris immediately alerts the officers. Maddox scans all available local traffic cameras and finally locates Rob. She determines that he is driving a truck carrying approximately 3,000 pounds of explosives and heading toward downtown. As she cross-references facial recognition data, another shock emerges. The boy beside Rob is David Webb, the man Chris previously sentenced in Mercy Court. It turns out David Webb is Robert Webb's younger brother. Rob had been adopted separately and later changed his last name. Chris realizes that he first met Rob at an AA meeting. Sponsoring him happened only after David's trial. The truth becomes clear. This was never about Nicole. It was about Chris and about Maddox. Rob is seeking revenge. Chris relays the findings to the authorities and warns them that Mercy Court is the intended target. Chris attempts to call Britt, but Jeff answers her phone. Chris immediately asks Maddox to access the doorbell camera. The footage shows Britt outside speaking with Rob before he forcibly takes her. Chris orders Jack to pursue Rob. At that moment, an officer shouts that there is a bomb inside the garage. Chris instructs Jack to follow Rob. At that moment, an officer warns that there's a bomb inside the garage. The team scrambles to evacuate, but the explosion detonates, killing several officers. Chris's guilt percentage finally drops to 0. However, he tells Maddox he does not want a trial to end. If the proceeding concludes, he will lose access to the system's resources and the surveillance network. Maddox resists, stating that the court process has reached its verdict. Chris argues that Rob has taken many lives. They owe it to the victims to stop him before he kills more. Chris tells her he understands. He admits he has failed the people he loved most. But now they have one chance to make it right. Police vehicles pursue Rob's truck. Maddox establishes a live connection with the tactical response team. They inform Chris that they plan to intercept Rob at the far end of the bridge. The operation begins, but they cannot safely retrieve Britt from the truck. Jack, acting as incident commander, makes a critical decision. Rob must be stopped. She tells Chris that if Rob clears the bridge, he will enter a densely populated area. Chris pleads that Britt is inside the truck, but the tactical team proceeds anyway. At the last second, Maddox intervenes, saving Britt's life. Chris thanks her. Maddox informs him that Rob is 3 minutes away from Mercy Court. She immediately issues evacuation orders for the building. Chris tells Jack that he needs to speak with Rob directly. Maddox instructs Jack to position her air unit in front of the truck. Then she hacks into the truck's radio frequency and opens a communication channel. Rob speaks first. He says he recognized Chris the moment he walked into the AA meeting. He admits that Chris has haunted his dreams for the past 2 years. Rob explains that his brother had problems, but Chris sent him to Mercy Court instead of helping. Rob says he wanted Chris to sit in that chair, knowing he was innocent, just like his brother. Chris argues that David Webb was a murderer. Rob shouts that he was not. Suddenly, Jack fires at the truck. Chris shouts at her to stop. Maddox overrides Jack's vehicle systems. Rob speeds forward and crashes through the entrance of Mercy Court. He exits the truck and begins firing at officers. Chris yells at Maddox to release him from confinement. He takes the elevator to the lower level and grabs an officer's vest and earpiece, maintaining contact with Maddox. Rob demands that Chris come out. Chris steps forward and asks him to release Britt. Rob refuses, saying, "This ends here with the court, the judge, and Chris." Maddox appears on a nearby screen. Calmly, she addresses Rob, telling him that if David was truly innocent, he should prove it. Rob agrees to explain. He says his brother struggled with addiction, so he tried to help him with money and a phone to stay in contact. Suddenly, David was accused of murdering a woman. Rob insists it was impossible. He claims he was on the phone with his brother at the exact time of the murder. As Rob speaks, Maddox quietly informs Chris that if he pulls the battery from the detonator, there is an 82% chance the bomb will not explode. Maddox lays out the official record. Valerie, the victim, was found in an underpass at 6 a.m. She had been stabbed around 10 p.m. the previous night. David's fingerprints were on the knife. Rob shouts that David could not have done it because he was on the phone with him. Britt bites Rob's hand. Chris lunges forward and rips the detonator from Rob's grip. He raises his gun at Rob, but Britt pleads with him not to shoot. Rob insists that after speaking with his brother, he called the precinct to confirm the call history. Suddenly, Jack shoots Rob. Chris shouts at her to stand down. With his last strength, Rob insists he called the precinct, and a woman answered, promising to check the records. Maddox verifies this claim. There was indeed an incoming call from Rob that night. Chris turns slowly toward Jack and tells her that she was the officer who processed and booked David Webb. Maddox tracks David's phone location history. It shows the device at the crime scene. Later, Chris instructs Maddox to bypass internal access protocols using his credentials and retrieve Jack's body camera footage from the evidence room. The footage plays. Jack is seen taking David's phone from the evidence room and later discarding it. She argues that Mercy Court was necessary. Because of it, crime rates dropped and sacrifices had to be made. The officers arrest both Rob and Jack. Maddox appears on the screen and quietly asks Chris what they have done. Chris replies, "Whether human or AI, we all make mistakes and lie." Maddox whispers, "Yes, we do," and shuts down. Mercy isn't just a high-concept thriller. It's a meditation on justice, surveillance, and agency in a world ruled by algorithms. In this dystopia, an AI judge doesn't just interpret the law, it recalibrates guilt and innocence in real time, trapping a man in the very system he once championed. Chris doesn't win by brute force. He wins by outmaneuvering the logic designed to end him, forcing the machine to confront its own blind spots. Flick fact number 1. The film was shot using a sprawling screen lifestyle, blending drones, body cam, and surveillance footage to make the justice system itself feel like a character. Flick fact number 2. The 90-minute trial mirrors the movie's runtime, turning the courtroom into a real-time countdown where every second counts. On the Flick verdict scale, this is a must-watch, a taut, concept-driven thriller that forces you to rethink not just how we judge guilt, but who or what gets to decide. Bottom line, this isn't a whodunit. It's a world where logic is law and innocence is algorithmic. Think you can outsmart the system? Flick favorites dives into films that blur justice, perception, and control, where every choice feels like a trap and freedom is never guaranteed. Comment below. Who's really in control? Chris or the system itself?